Hey guys, it's Lion here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we are doing another review. Today we're going to be looking at Legends and Lattes, the first book in whatever series this is going to eventually be called. However, there is a prequel story, and I do own it. I ordered it from Amazon. It's coming in tomorrow as of recording of this video. And yeah, so this is written by Travis Baldree, which he's a relatively famous guy in certain circles, right? He used to do video game development at some scale. I think he was someone that was in charge of a team of developers, not necessarily a developer himself. He also does voiceover work. He does narration for audiobooks, right? And that's actually where most people probably know him from. He's quite good at his job. And I think that the thing that he probably is most well known for is the Cradle books, right? That's actually where I learned about him. And at the same time that I learned about him doing the voiceover for the audiobooks of Cradle, I also learned that he had written his own story, and I learned that it was something that was probably up my alley, so I ended up picking it up. And there's quite a bit of an interesting story around this book, but I'm not really going to get into it. Basically, all I'll say about it is that the publisher is Tor, under their fantasy arm. However, it was actually originally a self-published story, which is cool. There's a kind of like a reason why it started as a self-published story, which is because of COVID, and then it eventually became like a proper published story. However, it's interesting that this became a properly published story, and something like Cradle and other works that Travis Baldree has been associated with have not. Why? Is it because of the genre? Because this is so like standard for fantasy that it's not that weird, and you know, something more in the cultivation or lit RPG type kind of realm is a bit too odd for Tor. I'm not really sure. I'm guessing that's probably why it is, but I don't know. The demographic for this is probably adult. Not in the sense that there's anything graphic or problematic or, you know, tough to understand for children, but because I don't think that teenagers will find a lot of interest in this. This is a pretty slow-paced read. Nothing too interesting or exciting happens here, but I think that from like the perspective of an adult that's into fantasy, this is maybe just the thing that you're looking for, right? And this is because it's a cozy fantasy story, you know, in quotation marks. I say that because I don't like the terminology. I think it's kind of stupid to make up a new term when one already exists, because this is just slice of life fantasy, and that has been a thing that has been prevalent in other countries. And honestly, even in the US, through other countries, right? Like the Smurfs are a slice of life fantasy series, right? But for whatever reason, with the start of this book, suddenly cozy fantasy is a thing, even though it's been a thing for a long time. It just wasn't popular with the, you know, average Joe in terms of reading, right? So it is what it is. It's just a slice of life fantasy. Look up light novels. You'll find a lot of them that fit into this category if you're looking for other stuff like it. And you also see that there's a slow but, you know, gradual development of this genre, right? There's this new book called Treason Can't Be Spelled Without T, or something like that, which I think is kind of interesting sounding from the title. There's one or two other books that are also in this vein that are that you can, you know, buy at Walmart and stuff. But I don't know. It's a pretty basic genre. It's just fantasy. It's the slice of life variety, and it's quite enjoyable. In terms of adaptation, it does not have one, but I can definitely see this being a like 1 hour long web episode type thing, right? Like, you know, the guys from Cradle started doing an animation, right? They want to make like a movie sort of deal, and that would be cool. But for something like this, I think that a single episode YouTube like animation would probably be the best thing for it. Like I think that would manage to fit the style of this book. It would manage to make sure that everything kind of makes sense, and it would be pretty enjoyable to watch. But I just don't think that that's really viable, right? And in terms of a rating, this is like a 4.5 out of 5 for me. Like, I really enjoyed it. There's some small issues that I have that are not big enough for me to really discuss them. I'll try to bring one up, or when I get around to it. But there really isn't anything wrong with this story. Like, there really isn't a lot of reasons for me to not give it a 5 out of 5. But at the same time, like, I don't necessarily think that it deserves that, right? So that's why I left it at 4.5 out of 5. It was calming and relaxing and enjoyable, and it actually kind of helped me quite a bit. It was so the reason I'm visiting my parents right now, besides the fact that my sister graduated, was because we were going to go down to Mexico to take a trip to visit my grandpa, who was having a lot of health issues, right? Turns out that the day after I got here, my grandpa actually suffered quite, traumatic, like, health issues while he was at the hospital. And so my dad had to, take an emergency flight down to Mexico, and my grandfather passed away at, that night, right? So my dad got to see him, but not anyone else in my family, right? Got to see him. And so we were just kind of sad for the next couple of days. And basically my mom's the type of person that's like, you have to deal with your emotions, but you also have to, like, move on and do other things, right? So don't just, like, sit down and stew in sadness. Do something to try to alleviate that, right? And so I kind of lived my life like that as well. And, a few days later, I was kind of feeling sad, and I didn't really have anything to do. And so I decided to finish reading this book, right? It was about time, right? So I started reading it. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of comfort come out of this series. Out of this book. I really liked it. It inspired me to make something, right? It made me want to make a cobbler for some reason. And I had this idea, and my grandma was here, and she was like, okay, I bought these apples, but these apples are not really enjoyable to eat for me, so can we do something with them? And so I made an apple cobbler, right? And it was inspired by the series, right? I really liked the character of Thimble, and so it inspired me. That also helped me kind of deal with some of the emotions I was dealing with at the time. And then it made me want to drink some coffee as well. So I ended up drinking some espresso I made in a mocha pot. And all of this kind of really helped me, not necessarily like work through my emotions, but kind of work through my emotions, right? And so this kind of a book that was kind of special for me in this kind of moment, right? And so I really appreciate it for that sense, right? So I kind of feel bad not giving it a 5 out of 5, but at the same time, it wasn't so good that, like, it deserves a 5 out of 5. Like, I've read better slice of life fantasy stories, right? So that's why it's a 4.5 out of 5. But I really liked it. I really am thankful for this book. I really am happy that I got around to reading it when I did, and that I brought it with me, right? Because I actually thought about not bringing it, right? So I'm pretty happy with this book. And I'm kind of sad right now, so it is what it is. But yeah, so that's it for that. In terms of a premise here, basically we have this orc adventurer. Her name is Viv, and she's basically done with this life, right? She does not want to be someone that kind of lives by killing, right? Or, adventuring and stuff. She wants to live a more peaceful life, which I think a lot of people that live in the city can kind of relate with, right? Not necessarily in the same way. Obviously, most people nowadays are not people that have to go around killing others to make life work, right? But we can all kind of understand that kind of idea of, like, settling down in a more peaceful, kind of quiet kind of, idea, right? And so she wants to do this, right? So she sets out on a final adventure, gets what she needs out of it, and then she moves away somewhere else to start up a coffee shop. And basically, that's basically what this book is about. It's just about this orc woman who decides to set up a coffee shop in this town called Thune. And, the people that come around and become part of her life through this, right? And actually, I really like that aspect. I really like the circle of fortune being this group of people thing that really worked from the books, right? So yeah, overall great stuff. In terms of the plot line here, basically it opens up with what I just said, right? So there's this adventure ending quite violently and quickly. Viv stabs a monster called a Scalvert. She then digs through its brain basically to find a stone, a Scalvert stone, and the stone is supposed to be helpful in bringing bounty and gold and fortune, a ring of fortune specifically, to someone when they set it down somewhere, right? So she needed this stone because she thought it would help her in her journey, right? And so it's quite cool. She gets this and she basically runs away from her old adventuring team dead in the night. She just decides that she doesn't want to deal with them, right? Anymore, and she just leaves. Then we see her move to this town called Thune, Thune. And she's using these dowsing rods to find the right location for her to set up her spot. And so she eventually finds a place. She has a front door neighbor called Lainey, who's this old lady. Kind of reminds me of my grandma, actually. She's just like constantly cleaning and going around and just kind of giving her opinion, kind of, crazy. So I really enjoy that, especially with my mom's mom, my grandma being here today, being here this month. It was kind of fun to see this little old lady and then just immediately interact with someone that's also like that. So I like that. And the place that she wants to settle in is owned by some gnome or something, some small guy. And this place is a livery. It's a horse stable, right? And so she goes to find this guy. She buys the lot from him, and now it's her shop. But it's a horse stable. It's not a coffee shop. So she has to go down to the docks to find a specific worker, someone that will help her. And she finds someone, a hobgoblin. His name is Calamity, but he goes by Cal because, of course, Calamity is a crazy name. And he strikes a deal with her. He's kind of an old, grouchy, taciturn kind of guy. And Viv manages to weasel her way into his good graces, and they kind of become friends out of it, right? And so they take the time to create this coffee shop out of this library, out of this horse stable. And I really enjoyed this aspect of the story. It was really relaxing and comforting. And I actually read this before I came down to Houston. So I already liked this, right? But I decided to kind of take my time to go over these events again, and I found myself enjoying them much more the second time, right? And then they're all done with that. So Cal gets paid. He comes in later, and he's like, I don't know if you're going to be able to actually sell this, but I hope for the best. I made you a sign. Here you go. And then this other lady shows up because Viv has decided that she's going to need more than one person to help her run the bar. She can't run it by herself, or the coffee shop. She can't run it by herself. And so she put up ads for someone to show up. And so someone did. And this person is Tandri. And Tandri is a succubus. And she has some sort of magical background. And she basically becomes Viv's partner in this endeavor, in this coffee shop thing, right? She basically becomes a secondary owner of this shop, more or less because she provides a lot of stuff that Viv can't provide. And throughout this, they also become kind of entangled emotionally in some way. It shows up and becomes relevant at the end of the story, so it's good, but I like how slow and easy and just simple that kind of relationship was, and developing and being noticed and stuff. I really like that. But so they become partners, and they open shop, and day one is bad because no one shows up. I think Cal shows up, and maybe Lainey shows up, right? The old lady. But I don't think that it was it worked out that well, right? I don't remember the details, but basically Tandri's like, okay, this isn't gonna work. We have to make a reason for people to show up. So let's make signs and let's announce that free samples are happening for a while, right? And so that's what they do. And the next morning, they get a small group of people showing up to try their coffee. One of them happens to be this little rat person, ratkin, I think is what they're called Thimble. And I immediately thought of Ratatouille because of this guy. And also, I love this character. I think he's so cute and enjoyable and adorable, right? And so, this works better. And so they do this for a few days, and then they decide, okay, now we're going to stop doing samples. Let's hope that people liked this coffee enough that they want to pay for it, right? And so they set up their menu, they set up the store. It's called Legends and Lattes now. And, well, there you go. And so it works out, and people are still coming, and people are coming more often. And then this guy comes in. His name is Hemington. He's a dude that works, that is a student at the wizard school down the road. Thematic Academy, I think is what it's called. Like, that is the name that they go by in this book. And he's like, well, I don't really like drinking anything. Do you have something to eat? And they don't. But Thimble happens to be someone that always comes in with an apron and flour all over the place. So Viv knows that he's a baker. So she asks him, hey man, do you have anything that you could make us that would go with coffee? And so he makes cinnamon rolls. And she immediately hires him. Tandri loves this stuff that he cooks. And so Thimble becomes part of the coffee shop now, right? And so now we have 3 people working here. Cal shows up here and then to help them when necessary, and Lainey does as well, just to kind of show up and eat stuff, right? And the shop is now officially a success. And this is where problems start. First of all, there's this mobster kind of character called the Madrigal, or, well, I want to call her, what it is in Spanish, right? So I want to say Madrigal, like the family from from Encanto. And this Madrigal happens to be some sort of gangster, like I said, right? And she's like putting pressure on Viv to pay a tax, right? A protection toll or whatever you want to call it. And Viv is like, I really don't want to do that. I can protect myself. I'm not here to get, taken advantage of. And so this sets up an issue, right? And then this guy, Fennis, shows up, and he used to be a member of the same adventuring group as Viv. And it turns out that he figured out what Viv got out of the last mission that they did together, right? The Scalvard Stone. And he knows that the Scalvard Stone is useful and meaningful for very specific reasons, right? And so he thinks that Viv swindled them. And he's kind of out for revenge for that. And this may be one of my only issues with the story. By the end of the resolution of this story arc, we realize that the stone's really not that important. And this guy's motivations don't seem that, meaningful for what he does, right? So he goes to Viv. He threatens her subtly. Then he goes away. And then it turns out that he actually burns down the coffee shop. And in the chaos, he steals the stone, right? But it turns out that the stone doesn't actually create riches. It only helps guide people or help attract people that are going to be meaningful for the person that set the stone, right? So Viv got the stone. She set it in her building. And so this stone helped her create a ring of fortune, but not a ring in the sense of money, or the ring of fortune in the sense of money, but ring of fortune as in the circle of people she knows is valuable and meaningful, and there's bonds that bring them together, right? And that's where Thimble and Calamity and Tandri and even the Madrigal, to an extent, once they figure out their issues, and Lainey and all of these people come from, right? And that means that for Fennis, there is no value in this stone, right? So, by the end of the book, in retrospect, there was no reason for the Fennis aspect of the story, right? Like, the Madrigal would have been good enough as a villain, right? But she doesn't end up being a villain, actually. She ends up being kind of like some sort of silent partner to an extent in the book, right? In the creation of the coffee shop, and actually in the reconstruction of the coffee shop after Fennis burned it down, right? And so the book actually ends when everyone kind of realizes that their shop is ready to open again. Success is, here and waiting for them to seize it. And Viv gives partial ownership to Thimble and Calamity and Tandri, right? And so throughout this, Tangerine and Viv also kind of struggling with the situation after the coffee shop got burnt down initially, kind of finally form a romantic relationship, right? And so this romantic relationship is kind of the climax of the story. And overall, I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I really liked everything. And I really liked the ending, right? The epilogue here is Fennis getting some comeuppance by kind of having to fight Lack, who is the Madrigal's lackey. So kind of lame name there, but cool. And then at the end, we also get a prequel story. And actually, the prequel story is kind of boring, but it actually helps us understand a bit more about Viv and kind of where she comes from. We kind of see her empathize with this enemy that she has, who also is trying to get out of the business that they're in. And we also get to see her find out about coffee, right? And so this prequel story feels more like a draft for like the backstory of Viv than it really feels like a part of the storytelling. So it wasn't really my favorite, but I liked everything in this book. I like what it encompassed. I like the meaning behind it. I liked the characters and stuff. So I really liked this story quite a bit. And so let's actually talk about the characters here. So we have Viv, who is a sweet and gentle, like, giant type character, right? She's not necessarily like Hagrid, right? Not that level of sweet giant kind of character, but kind of in that vein, right? She's willing to do violence and stuff, and she's quite good at it because she's an orc, but she doesn't really want that to be who she is, right? At least not anymore. And so I really like that character. Tangerine is quite nice. She is one of those, like, I don't know what the archetype is called, but it's like the hot girl that wants to be taken seriously and not get ahead because of her looks. Whatever that character type is, that's what she is, right? Because she's like a succubus, right? So she is like an attractive character just by virtue of being a succubus. And she has magic that relates to that. And she has this backstory where she wanted to go to the Thaumic Academy in order to kind of find a place for her to belong, where she wasn't just treated differently because she was a succubus, but rather accepted because she was good at her job, right? Good at her studies and interests, right? It didn't work out for her, but it led her to Viv, right? So ultimately it's okay, but she kind of has this chip on her shoulder about who she is, right? And then there's Cal, and he's just like a hobgoblin. There's nothing really wrong or special about him. He's just someone that really takes his work seriously, but is kind of discriminated against because he's not like the other people that work at the docks, right? Or the port or wherever it is that he works, right? So, yeah. And Simple doesn't have any problems either. Maybe some people would not be happy with, a little rat person making cake for them, right? But overall, I really like this character. I think he's the best one. I mean, there's clearly something in his past because he's a very quiet and kind of anxious person, and it's not just because he's a little mouse, right? There has to be more to it, but it wasn't really relevant to the story here, right? So we didn't get to see it, but he's probably my favorite character. I just like this idea of this like cute little rat person that just like loves baking is really great, right? Ratatouille is my favorite movie probably ever. Or one of my favorite movies, right? That's the reason I like cooking as an adult. Is the reason why I even got into cooking when I was a teenager. Or like a child, actually. And to see a character like Remy is great. I really love this character. So, yeah. Then we have Amity, which is a giant cat thing. And there's more to this cat that meets the eye, but I really don't know what it is. And then Pendry, who is a stonemason who just wants to rock out. And he has this, I don't know, like the whole vibe of Legends of Lattes is like this, like, hipster kind of thing, right? And so Pendry kind of makes alternative music, essentially. And people eventually like it, but initially they're like, oh, what the fuck is this, right? And so he has to kind of ease them into it by playing normal music first. I like this character. Not that much, though. I mean, like, ultimately he's kind of not that relevant, but I like him anyways. I think he's nice. In terms of the other characters, I mean, we have Lack and Madrigal, and Lack is more or less the main antagonistic force throughout the whole book, and in the sense that he represents the antagonist. He doesn't really do anything antagonistic, though. The Madrigal ends up being kind of more relevant and powerful, but she's just kind of like an old lady. Like, the interaction between her and Viv kind of reminded me of something from, like, the originals, right? Like, a powerful person able of doing violence that decides to not do violence, meeting with someone else of the same kind of vibe, right? It's not really all that special. I like the character. I like the subversion of her being like a little old lady. That was nice. But not really all that important and interesting. And like I said with Venice, his motivations, although understandable, like, conceptually, are not expounded upon enough for me to really feel like they're valid. And so it kind of ends up being like the conflict of the book feels like a bit much for the context of the book, if that makes sense. So I don't know, but it's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of like there. It's just something I noticed. And then we have other characters. So Fennis used to be part of the same team as Viv, and the other characters that are like that are also Rune, who is a dwarf, and he sounds fun. Galina, who I want to keep calling Gallina because that's just how you spell chicken in Spanish. Gallina or Galina, I think it's Galina, right? She's a gnome. And Tavis, who is a stone fae. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that looks like either. But these characters are fun, interesting. Tavis is like Calamity, Galina is like Tandri, and Rune, you could say, is kind of like Thimble, right? Not exactly. Like, that kind of falls apart a little bit, but, the new group of people that she is friends with are, in some way representative of the old people she was friends with and the kind of old relationship that she had with them in some way, right? So, this works out pretty nicely for me. I like that overall. In terms of world building, there really isn't much. I mean, there's a lot of implied stuff, but this is not really the point of the book. And a lot of the implications actually don't really make sense. Like, it's kind of odd, right? Like, latte is a word that exists in this universe, right? But it's not because Italians exist in this universe. It's because there was an old gnome who was named Latte, right? Some, like, I can't remember his name, but it was like a pun. It was like about him being fat or like eating a lot, right? And he was the guy that made the latte, so he named it after himself. And that works, but it's kind of ridiculous, right? Like, maybe there just could have been another name for the milk plus coffee mixture, right? Also, gnomes seem insanely ahead of everyone else in terms of technology because, well, it's like magical technology, right? So it's not exactly the same, but like, what level of technological advancement are we talking about here that you have like adventurers at the same time as like coffee machines, right? Like, it's not that important, but I feel like some of it has to make sense and not really too much of it does. Not that it's really all that important to the story, like I said, so it's not that big of a deal, but if you sit down to think about it a little bit, you kind of do lose like the plot a little bit. You're like, oh, well, none of this makes sense, so it's kind of hard to enjoy if you think about it too much. So just don't think about it. Think about it enough to understand what's going on, but don't think about it so much that you tear apart the setting, because it's not really ultimately about the setting. It's about the characters and the interactions and this idea of like the power of coffee specifically, but in general food, of bringing people together, right? So I like that. I think it's good. In terms of artwork and fan service, there's no artwork. I really wish there was, because this really feels very similar to a light novel for me. And so I really wish that there was more like bits and bobs here. Like, a little bit of artwork would have been nice. A character sheet or something, because, the background here talks about D&D players. This isn't really a D&D thing, but close enough, I guess. A few character sheets of these characters would have been nice. Not that important, but, something. A little bit extra would have been cool. What else? In terms of fan service, I mean, there's none. There's no, like, callbacks to other people. There's no, adult content of any sort. I mean, there's some implications to some of it, but it's really not that type of book. So, there really isn't too much going on there. But I really would have liked artwork because I really like these covers, right? I think that they look great. The back also looks nice. That's what Thimble looks like. But, I just wish there was more. So that's really, complaint number 2 there. So yeah, ratings wise, 4 out of 5 or 4.5 out of 5, like I said. Nearly perfect, but the thing is that if you look a little bit too deeply into the world building, kind of falls apart. If you look at Fennis as a character and his motivations, they kind of fall apart as well. So there's some issues. The issues are not significant enough for me to not enjoy this book, but they're there enough for me to discount some pointage from the book. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Legends and Lattes. Let me know what you guys thought down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you guys later.